I've always loved the woods. Something about the serenity and beauty of nature just calms my soul. So, taking a walk in the woods sounded like a perfect idea, especially now that everything is so hectic and stressful. As I walk deeper and deeper into the woods, the light begins to fade and the trees become more dense. I don't worry because I'm familiar with these woods. I know the area like the back of my hand, or so I thought. Suddenly, the wind changes, and the temperature drops noticeably. A sense of foreboding washes over me, and I begin to regret coming here. However, I don't want to seem scared to myself, so I keep trudging deeper into the woods. The trees become twisted, and the path starts to fade. The sun sets, and I start to panic. It's been getting darker and darker for a while now. But it's not the darkness that creeps me out. It's the silence. There are no sounds of wildlife, no birds chirping, or even the rustle of leaves in the wind. Suddenly, I hear a groan, something like an animal in pain. I freeze in terror, my heart pounding in my chest. I listen carefully, but there are no other sounds. So, I start to walk faster, thinking it can't be much farther. As I walk, a tree branch falls behind me, and I realize there's nobody else around. The woods are silent and still, silence broken only by the sound of my own footsteps. Finally, I see a clearing where a light flickers. It gives me a little hope. Maybe somebody's camping out here and they can help me find my way back. As I get closer, I see a group of people gathered around a campfire. There are 4 people, hooded and robed, like they came straight out of a cult. The light flickers and dances along the edges of their robes, barely illuminating their faces. I realize I should turn around, but my curiosity won't let me. I step out into the open, and they all turn to look at me at once. I feel like a deer caught in the headlights, and a chill runs down my spine. They don't say a word. They just stare at me with their empty eyes. I begin to back away slowly, but they start to move too, like they're following me, but without moving their feet. The light flickers, and I see one of them in a detail for a split second. Their mouth is open, but there are no teeth or tongue, just a black abyss inside. I turn around and run, not even caring about the path anymore. I just need to escape from those things. As I run, I hear their footsteps getting closer and closer, like they're gaining on me. Finally, I burst out of the woods and didn't look back until I was in my car. I drove straight home and locked all the doors. The next morning, I tried to reassure myself it was just my imagination, but a deep part of me knows it was real. Those figures in the woods, I don't think they were human. I had always loved hiking, but this time was different. The woods were darker, the branches were twisted, and the silence was palpable. My footsteps were the only sound I could hear, and the trees were so dense that the sun barely penetrated through them. As I walked, I looked around and saw something that made me stop in my tracks. The trees were twisting and contorting like something out of a horror movie, and I knew I had made a mistake in coming here. My heart was beating faster and faster as I continued into the woods. I kept moving forward, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a sound. Something was rustling in the bushes. I tried to convince myself that it was just a small animal, but my imagination was running wild. I was suddenly overcome by an intense fear, unlike anything I had experienced before. I tried to pick up my pace, but I quickly realized that I was hopelessly lost. I couldn't tell where I was or which way to go. It was as if the woods were alive and deciding where I would go. The rustling became louder, and I knew something was following me. I kept walking, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. The rustling was now accompanied by the sound of footsteps, and I knew for sure that I wasn't alone. My heart was racing, and my breath came in short gasps as I tried to keep moving forward. The footsteps grew closer and closer until finally I turned around. There they were, 3 figures looming in the darkness. I couldn't see their faces, but something about their presence was otherworldly. And then, I saw their eyes. Their eyes were solely glowing red. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figures started closing in on me, and I was frozen with fear. Suddenly, one of them reached out a hand toward me, and I knew that they weren't human. With a burst of adrenaline, I finally found my legs, and I sprinted away as fast as I could. The sound of my pounding heart filled my ears as I ran blindly through the woods. Eventually, I made it out of the woods and collapsed at the edge. I took deep breaths as I tried to calm my racing heart, but I knew that I would never forget the fear I had felt in those woods. To this day, I don't know what those figures were or why they were following me, but I do know that I will never go hiking alone in the woods again, not after that terrifying experience. The woods had always been my sanctuary. As a child, I would spend hours wandering through the trees without a care in the world. But that day, something was off. It was as if the woods were trying to tell me something. The trees were twisted and gnarled, and an eerie silence filled the air. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself that it was just my imagination as I continued down the path. As I walked, the silence grew louder, and my footsteps echoed in my ears. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I stopped in my tracks. My eyes scanned the dimly lit woods, but there was nothing there, nothing visible anyway. But I knew something was watching me. I could feel it. It was as if whatever was out there was hunting me. A chill ran down my spine and I started to jog, making my way faster down the path. Suddenly the silence was broken by a loud crunching sound. It sounded like heavy footsteps, coming closer and closer. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I tried to convince myself that it was just a deer or some other harmless animal. But then, in the distance, I saw a dark figure lurking between the trees. I stopped, frozen in terror. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes piercing through me. My mind raced, and I didn't know what to do. Should I run? But where would I go? Or should I turn back? But what if it followed me? The figure continued to lurk, and I began to back away, step by step, not taking my eyes off it. But then the figure started to move towards me, and my fear became overwhelming. I started to run, but my feet were heavy with fear, and the forest floor was twisted with roots, tripping me up, making me stumble. I could hear the footsteps behind me getting louder and louder, and my heart was pounding in my ears. I ran until my lungs felt like they were going to burst, not daring to look back, convinced that it was right behind me. Finally, I burst out of the woods, gasping for air. As I caught my breath, I realized that it had stopped chasing me. I looked back toward the woods, but I could see nothing but darkness. But I knew that something had been there, something that didn't belong in this world. I never went back to those woods again, but whenever I walk through the forest now, I can still feel its gaze on me, watching and waiting. I always found solace in walking in the woods. The sounds of leaves rustling in the breeze and the chirping of birds made me feel like I was at peace. But on this particular day, as I wandered through the dense forest, I noticed something felt off. A sense of unease washed over me, and the trees that used to bring me joy now appeared to be menacing and creepy. I took deep breaths and willed myself to keep moving forward, but couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. As I continued down the beaten path, I saw something that made my heart race. It was a shadow in the bushes that seemed to be following me. My heart rate increased, and my breathing became labored. I had heard stories of creatures that lurked in these woods, but I had always assumed it was just folklore. I turned towards the shrubbery, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the shadow was still there. My instincts told me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. The shadow continued stalking me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to move faster, but my legs felt like lead. Suddenly, the shadow disappeared into the trees, and I thought I was safe for a moment. I tried to ease my breathing and slow my heart rate, but the feeling of being watched persisted. The rustling of leaves and twigs brought me back to reality, and I turned around to see the shadow emerging from the trees just a few yards away. I was blinded by fear and couldn't move. As the shadow lurked slowly towards me, I realized that it was a creature, not of this world. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, swaying its head, letting out a low growl. Every biological response in my body told me that I was in grave danger. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth, and I knew that I was doomed. The creature lunged at me, and I frantically tried to dodge it, but it was too fast. I felt a sharp pain in my neck as its sharp teeth sunk in, and I knew it was over. I fell to the ground as everything went dark. When I regained consciousness, I was alone, deep in the woods. I had somehow survived the attack, but the memories of the creature still haunt me. I never returned to the woods and warn anyone who would listen to never venture in there again. Walking in the woods is one of my favorite activities. There's something thrilling about the feeling of isolation, the rustle of leaves underfoot, and the chance to explore nature's secrets. But as I walked deeper into the forest, my sense of wonder was quickly replaced by terror. At first, I thought the whispers were just a figment of my imagination. But as they grew louder, I realized I was walking in haunted woods. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a chill ran down my spine. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it persisted, growing stronger and stronger with every step I took. The whispers were definitely not of human origin. They sounded like they were coming from all around me, as if the very trees themselves were speaking. The leaves rustled with an urgency, and the air seemed to thicken with an undeniable presence. Then the shadows began to move, and I saw a figure darting behind a tree. I tried to get a better look, but the figure was gone, leaving behind an eerie silence. I should have turned back, but I was desperate to see more. My curiosity got the better of me, and I walked further into the woods. That's when I saw her. A ghostly figure, glowing in the darkness, her face contorted in agony. I couldn't look away, despite the sheer terror coursing through my veins. She beckoned towards me, as if asking for help, but her eyes held a clear warning. I moved towards her, knowing that it was a mistake, but unable to stop myself. Her ghostly form led me deep into the woods, her voice growing softer and more insistent. She kept pointing ahead, towards a small clearing that was barely visible in the low light. As we approached the clearing, the ghost abruptly vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. It was then that I realized I had walked right into a trap. There were trees everywhere, seemingly closing in on me, cutting off my exit. The whispering sound grew louder and more urgent, almost deafening in its constant harangue. I could sense that something was watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong move. And then, the trees began to move. They twisted and contorted in impossible ways, reaching out towards me with gnarled fingers. I could feel their cold touch as they grasped at me, as if trying to pull me into the earth. I frantically tried to escape, but the woods had become my prison. The whispers grew louder, and my heart pounded in my chest as I realized that they were the voices of the dead, mourning their lost souls. I stumbled through the darkness, praying for a way out. But all I could see was the ghostly figure of the woman, beckoning me towards an unknown fate. As I sank to the ground, my strength leaving me, the whispering stopped. The trees grew still, and I knew deep down that there was no way out of the haunted woods. I would be trapped in this place forevermore, with the voices of the dead in my ears and the beckoning of the departed haunting me.